Should be okay. Right. Okay. So that when I did the presentation, which was on Tuesday, wasn't it? I left you with, let me just get this on the right place and then share it. I left you with this particular screen here, which was about royal jelly for Homo sapiens. All right. And I was looking there at how you can influence the gene expression of a bee by basically what the bee eats. So if the bee eats royal jelly, then the bee is different. So the difference between the queen bee and the worker bee is not the DNA; it's that the queen bee eats royal jelly for the whole of her life. Now, if anyone's got any questions, just interrupt me. Don't worry about waiting to the end. I can go on for hours and hours and hours, and I'm very happy to answer any questions anyone's got. Now, so what am I saying? Well, what I'm saying in this is that I've worked out what causes people to age, and to some extent what you can do about it. And I put together an XPRIZE team who in one sense, we're not necessarily even testing the hypothesis because the hypothesis has already been tested. Now, one of the first things that people think about when somebody claims to have made some, even if mild progress in dealing with aging is what happens to the person experimenting with it. And you look at me and you think, I'm an old bloke with a bushy white beard, and well, what's the use of that? Because it's not having much of an effect. Well, that's a question of evidence in many ways. So if I share that screen again, and we go on to where I've got to over the past few years. So I used to be really fat. And if you look at the one on the left, you can see how I have actually made a certain number of changes. In the end, if we think of aging as being something where cells don't function correctly, so over time they stop functioning, they don't produce pigmented hair, the diabetes, you get metabolic syndrome, you get chronic kidney disease, atherosclerosis, osteoporosis, all of those things. If you suddenly fix that, it's not like somebody goes into a rejuvenation box and comes out looking like a teenager. It's that gradually the cells will then start functioning again. Now, I want to start, and as I said, if you've got questions, just ask questions as we're going along. Don't wait to the end, although obviously I'm happy to have a session at the end. So, and I'll go through the biochemistry of this reasonably rapidly. So what I'm arguing is that most of the phenotypes of aging arise from cells not producing the right proteins. There may be other things, problems with DNA damage, but most of it is through cells not producing the right proteins. And in the literature, there's quite a bit of evidence for this. And if you're looking at it, what is going wrong? You have to ask a question, which is, how does a cell decide what proteins to produce when it's low on energy? Because there's a two-stage process, one where the DNA is transcribed into mRNA, and then there's a second stage where it's translated into protein. And it needs to manage that balance of energy. Now, that is done through the epigenetics, but not the epigenetics of DNA methylation, but the epigenetics of acetylation of the histone. So basically, the cell has the DNA attached to a protein called the histone, and that protein is opened up to enable an enzyme called RNA polymerase II to transcribe the genes into messenger RNA, and then that goes off to the ribosome to get translated. All of this is very energy intensive, And if there wasn't the acetylation process to manage it, you could end up, in fact, you see this when you have histone deacetylase strongly inhibited, you can get ATP depletion, atoptosis. There are a number of sources in the literature, and if you look at the page that I've linked to, it links to all the literature about this. There's a number of sources that indicate there is a problem with longer genes being transcribed when people are older. And there are three alternative hypotheses. One is DNA damage. Another one is there are problems with splicing factors. My one is that there's a limit on substrate. My argument with DNA damage is if the DNA was damaged, it would just stop. It wouldn't be in a situation where it goes wrong slowly. Basically, a cell would stop producing that protein. Splicing factors, well, this is produced by Lorna Harris, Professor Lorna Harris from Exeter University. She's argued this case. And she and I agreed substantially, because actually acetyl-CoA, which is the substrate that's required for acetylation, is known to regulate splicing. So, and there's quite a bit of evidence on that. So my argument is it comes down in the end of the day to a shortage of a molecule called acetyl-CoA. And this is a key indicator of energy availability, and it comes from a number of different sources. But the most important source for this purpose is out of the mitochondria. And there is a protein which is in the inner mitochondrial membrane called the citrate carrier, that it comes out of there, but it can come from outside the cell as well. Now, that was, oops, that's gone, sorry about that. We're going the wrong way there. Right, okay, so, yes, here we go. Right, so it's well known that higher serum citrate is pro-longevity, and in fact, the zygote uses citrate to increase acetylation and facilitate transcription. There are arguments about the expression of what's called the Mindy gene, which is the mammalian version of I'm Not Dead Yet, which is SLC13A5. But basically, dietary citrate supplementation has been used, and citrate gets converted into acetyl-CoA, by the way, has been used to enhance longevity in Drosophila, as is referenced in here. There is an interesting question as to what the feedback system is that causes particularly the failure to differentiate of stem cells, which is this whole point about stem cells and creating senescent cells from stem cells rather than getting proper somatic cells. And there is actually a paper which was published in Portugal, which identifies the interleukin 10, which people would think of normally as being an anti-inflammatory cytokine, but actually in this instance, because it inhibits nuclear factor kappa B, it causes a shortage of the citrate carrier in the membrane. And this is the paper actually in Portugal. So basically, the issues with translation, then potentially there are further issues there with ATP shortage. So the cells need a mechanism to manage energy usage. And my argument is, well, it's obvious. I'm not the only person who says it's acetyl-CoA that manages that. And we see that modified with the queen bee. And the interesting thing about royal jelly is that it includes vitamin B5, an HDAC inhibitor, and also it includes AMPK activators as well, which is important for improving mitochondrial quality. So you can do interventions on transcription. One of those being exogenous acetate and citrate. Another one is actually inhibiting the Janus kinase through which IL-10 operates, and there are drugs that do that. I personally think that's slightly hazardous, and I wouldn't recommend it as a route. And another route is through slowing down deacetylation so that the RNA polymerase II can continue to do its work. A very good route is improving mitochondrial quality. And there are people like Mitrix Bio who look at the question of the variation of mitochondrial DNA between different mitochondria. Obviously, one of the problems that mitochondria have is that when the mitochondria are doing their biz, generating energy, etc., generating ATP, they also generate reactive oxygen species. And the difference about mitochondrial DNA, which is stored in the mitochondria and is mainly for the electron transport chain, is that it is much more vulnerable to damage because it's not got a histone. And so you get the damage done to the mitochondrial DNA gradually over time. There are many things that can be used to improve mitochondrial quality, like rapamycin, urolithin A. I've got a list of them here. Exercise is known for that as well, and there's lots of ways you can do that. But at the end of the day, if the mitochondria are insufficiently efficient, the cell's not going to be able to do everything it wants to do. There was a very interesting paper just published very recently that looks at the acid-base balance as well. And the interesting thing about acid-base balance is that the main function that cells use to increase the pH, because they need to be slightly alkaline, is by deacetylating the histone. Now, if you haven't got an acetylated histone in the first instance, you have some difficulties with that. And it's very interesting. In fact, there was a paper, I think, in 1996 that correlated acidity with age, which in itself shows there's some relevance to that as well. So what I've done is not just me. Obviously, it's biohacking, isn't it? So, and there's no placebo control, but there is always an argument about placebo control. If you've got something which has to move the needle a very long way and is unlikely to be done, through changes to cortisol levels or whatever, then once you have a sufficiently dramatic shift, then that in itself is evidence to rely on. Obviously, you start on what the X Prize are doing is N=1 crossover trials. So they measure values for individuals, and then they look for changes in those values as well. So these are some of my results. So CRP under 0.15 milligrams per liter, which is 0.015 milligrams per deciliter. You can see here quite a big shift in glucose handling between prior to when I was doing the routines here, where it was often going over 10 millimolar. Now, for American terms, you multiply by 18, so that's 180. I think it's milligrams per deciliter that you look for glucose measurements. Cystatin C, again, I was doing very well with cystatin C. Epigenetic ages, there are lots of ways of measuring these things. I have got here the true diagnostic ones. I'm not a massive fan of epigenetic age because I don't think it's that reliable. But at the end of the day, I'm 64. If true diagnostics say that my biochemistry is at the age of 37, I'm not going to complain. But actually, more important, I think, is the rapid repair. And actually, on the web page that I'd linked through to, I give some evidence of how, because I'm doing weekly blood tests, I can measure how quickly my arm repairs each week. And there's sort of slow hair regrowth, which I can look at in more detail if you want, and improvements in muscle mass, which are all, well, I think people know about the geroscience hypothesis, which was mentioned by Dr. Barzilai in his presentation a couple of days ago. And the hypothesis there is if you intervene on the key aging pathways, you start fixing lots of things, not just one thing at a time. I have done a page on linking my proposals to the judging criteria for your MAO. This is the stuff here. There's no sense of me talking about this now because I've put all of this as a document. If you want to read it, it's as a document on my idea. And I deal with the questions as to what you might be looking at in the judging approach. Now, I have actually, well, there's a little bit more in terms of some links to papers there. But frankly, at this point, it's a good, I've gone through it very, very quickly to try and make sure we fit in within the time. I shall take down the share. And if anyone's got any questions, please ask.
Well, I guess I can start.
Well then.
So, all right, John. So what's the path here? I mean, assume that you get to a point where you're reasonably convinced this is effective. What's next?
Well, what I'm doing, what I am actually doing is I've got a team together for the X Prize.
Hmm.
The way the X Prize works is there's a semi-finals and finals.
Yeah.
And I had a few, I've got about 20 people doing this because it's mainly using, the rapamycin is a regulated drug, but um, I also use melatonin, which in the USA is
Yeah.
not regulated. In Europe, it is regulated,
Yeah.
although it varies from country to country. Um, Basically, I am gradually getting more and more people doing this. Within the UK regulatory system, this is what's called not a CT imp. In an American sense, this is not an IND because none of it. If you take citrate at the center of all of this, it's used in blood transfusions. So every time anyone has not every time, but most of the time when people take a blood transfusion, they have a massive dose of citrate as well, sodium citrate. There are complexities with it because of the cation anion issue. And there's lots of complexities there. And I'm learning things all the time as we go through with more people. But it's in essence, I've held back on doing things. So I've got people who already want to participate in the semi-finals. Well, the way X Prize are doing it, if you don't know, is the semi-finals is just do something
Yeah.
and then show us the results. And the
Mhm.
finals is over a number of years and trying to hit particular objectives. One of the challenges with this particular approach is because you're skewing biomarkers, you may have to hold back a little bit. It depends on people's healthy state because
Mhm.
it's a little bit like herding cats. That is, you can get sort of some of the biomarkers to go in the good direction and other ones go in the wrong direction.
Right.
And so you have to hold back. So if you take rapamycin as a drug,
Mhm.
rapamycin has some good effects, but it also messes up the lipids and the glucose handling. Now, there are ways of dealing with that, but that doesn't necessarily fit with rapidly changing things because you may have to hold back and not use too much rapamycin. Urolithin A may be different. I don't know so much with
Mm.
urolithin A. I've done some experimentation with it.
Okay.
And obviously, there's the whole issue about AMPK activators in TCM, which is really interesting. All the Yankee supplements that people have used for centuries
Mhm.
happen to be AMPK activators.
Mm.
And that's that. These are things like ginkgo biloba, ginseng, etc. Now, the problem is you've got to move the needle, and how you move the needle is complex. I've done some experimentation with large doses of histone deacetylase inhibitors. Now, we talk about histone deacetylase inhibitors, but if you've studied longevity in any way, you'll know about curcumin, berberine, pterostilbene, etc., etc. A lot of the polyphenols happen to be
Mhm.
histone deacetylase inhibitors. Now, I can talk more about different classes, but let's not worry about that now. I'm very happy to answer any questions, but you don't want too much detail. So basically, I'm just getting on with it, in short.
Understood. Understood. John, what's your formal training in all of this? I was looking at your resume, and you seem to have a varied background.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly. I got a degree in atomic, nuclear, and theoretical physics
yeah.
from Magdalen College, Oxford.
Right.
I was actually a scholar in natural science, which means that I did particularly well in the exams.
Mhm.
And I have no formal training in biochemistry at all. And that's the way it is.
Yep. Understood. I mean, how would you compare and contrast what you're doing with the work of people like, David Sinclair at Harvard, for example?
Well, the Yamanaka factors, I think SOX2 is the key Yamanaka factor that has the same effects. It's
Mhm.
SOX2 drives very emphatic autophagy. And what happens with autophagy, and particularly mitophagy, is the cell concentrates on clearing out the mitochondria with the lower mitochondrial membrane potential. Now that's quite a good way. Well, it's if you kill off all the mitochondria that have a lower mitochondrial membrane potential, and then you develop new mitochondria from the remaining
Mhm.
mitochondria, the average membrane potential goes up. Now
Yep.
that's good to some extent,
Mhm.
except for ATP synthase, because if you have damage the mitochondria. You see, most of the mitochondrial DNA is to do with the electron transport chain.
Mhm.
Little bit for people about mitochondrial DNA. Obviously, mitochondria are thought to have been bacteria that joined the archaea a few billion years ago, and they give the advantage that the cell can produce a lot more energy. And gradually, a lot of the DNA, a lot of the genes for producing mitochondria migrated to the nucleus. But some genes remain within the mitochondrion. And you have this strange thing, and it's actually a circular genome without a histone. And without a histone is a very important point. And oddly enough, in any one mitochondrion, you can have more than one copy of the mitochondrial DNA. And it can be different. Right? And there's some really interesting things about the mitochondrial bottleneck when eggs are produced and all that sort of stuff, and how it links to fertility and things like that. But as I said, I could go on for hours.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject.
It's
Thanks for
very
answering the
interesting.
questions,
It is
John.
very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to monopolize the whole conversation. I'm sure others have questions.
Well, I'm in no rush, but obviously there's somebody else doing something in 34 minutes, so I can't displace them. No questions?
No. I had a quick question.
Go on
So
then.
to kind of drill down on Chris's point more, are you like, is there a product here? Do you want
Well,
do you want
what it
people
is, I'm
to
still learning
ingest royal
about it.
jelly?
So there is a product, and it could be offered as a service, but I still want to learn more about how it operates, because you're skewing people's metabolism. And although it's a different area, although it's using natural substances, it's a very different area of intervention. And although there are no regulatory requirements, I want to learn enough about it so I feel comfortable that it's going to do people good rather than harm. And so I don't want to go out selling it to loads of people, which I could do, because this is the one thing, because you're treating aging, it's not a regulated substance, right? Because it's not a disease. That was my son coming in. He's 12. But he's gone away again now. Which is good.
Yeah, I love
it's not a treating aging is not regulated.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So
Sorry?
maybe next
It isn't.
steps would be
Look, I had a
like a
conversation with the FDA about it.
Yeah.
Well, because obviously I'm doing a trial, but it's not it's not regulated, because it's not a new. It's a trial. Obviously, as part of the X Prize, I'll do a trial. I was doing it anyway, but I've just delayed some aspects to fit in with the X Prize timescales, because one of the good things about the X Prize is having a standard metric. So I've listed that in the document I put about the judging criteria. So they have a standard metric for identifying whether or not you're hitting their objective. Their objective is very hard to hit. It's a 10-year improvement in three different areas of metabolism, which is muscle, cognition, and immune. It is hard to hit. Anyone who thinks it's easy, if you could do that today, it'll make a massive difference. We don't really have to. I don't think I have to explain to you how significant all of this potentially is. Do I?
No, of course not.
I think you probably know.
I'm just wondering what's the next step and how can we help?
Answer the question.
Is there, and then if you have, you said you have a small cohort of.
Why did I apply for your prize? Why did I apply for your prize? All right. Well, it's good practice for me to be presenting my arguments. B, you know your stuff, and therefore you'll ask good questions. C, I just need to get. You sit there. I sit there and think, well, what do I do? I've played a few gigs this year. I'm going to do other things. I'm doing all of this. Obviously, I will need to build lots of different things. But it's should I just sit down and not promote this? I think I probably should promote it. So I'm promoting it. But at the end of the day, I'm okay. I've got the funding. I've got I've got the science. That's all really coming from me. I've got participants, but I'm willing to take on more participants. The reason I'm talking to the FDA, as well as the regulators in the UK, is I want this to be a global process, not just a domestic UK process. But it's obviously a lot easier for me in the UK because I've got loads of contacts here. Do you want to know what the background is?
Feel free, John.
It's an AI representation of RNA polymerase II doing its biz. It's
nice.
probably nothing like what actually happens,
Yeah.
but it's quite novel. And then the other little logo thing is supposed to be a representation, again, in an Art Deco style of citrate.
Very nice.
You might as well. It's a novelty, isn't it? You know.
Yeah.
AI has its
all the
uses, even
images.
if they're sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say all the images in my presentation are AI generated. With the...
Yeah, well,
So, it's fun.
It doesn't. It's as we were discussing earlier, Chris and I. He and I are both sort of mild AI skeptics, I would say. Mild. It's not gonna. It's not. You know, when you ask it questions like, for instance, what the relationship is between citrate efflux and the mitochondrial membrane potential, it gets it completely back to front. So there you go.
Yeah.
So how do can we harvest royal jelly ourselves, or?
Well, you can do that. I don't. Let's think about the bees. Well, EU social creatures are interesting because also the naked mole rat is EU social. Within the bees, what I think bees have evolved to do is actually to hobble the worker bee to some extent. Now, different creatures have different lifespans. True. All right. There are, in my view, two key drivers to this. One is the burden of senescent cells, and the other one is mitochondrial quality. Different creatures have a different balance between the two. So if you take C. elegans, in C. elegans, adult somatic cells do not divide. So you're not going to get any form of replicative senescence because the cells are not dividing. So much that the worm bot's a nice idea, and there are other people doing very similar things, inherently it's flawed when it comes to looking at how you handle senescent cells because they ain't got any. All right, and that's not from replicative senescence because they don't replicate, and so it's a nice easy test. Human beings, I think, live a lot longer than mice because we handle our mitochondria better. We have better systems of managing mitochondria. Very interesting thing about telomerase, for instance, is that everyone knows telomerase extends telomeres. Well, we don't really have replicative senescence, so it's not the shortage of the telomeres that matters. Telomerase also improves the quality of the mitochondria. So when you have longer telomeres, because you've got more telomerase, you're also improving your mitochondria. So I think if you just mainline royal jelly, I'm not sure that's going to do you much good. We need a royal jelly for human beings. That's basically what I produced.
Gotcha.
I mix it on my kitchen table. I could show you the pictures of all the things in the other room, but you know, I buy the stuff in kilograms and mix it up. Obviously, I'm not selling it at the moment, so there's no, you know, it's just people experimenting, mainly family and friends.
Well, I'm very glad that you're participating. We're continuing this topic, you know, as a learning and as a learning subject from last year. James Payer was our keynote speaker, and you know, without making any, you know, statements that could be considered partial or anything like that. That's not. I never do that. I'm a host, but I was very glad that you participated, and we have this topic to consider this year as
Well,
well.
good. Well, it's
Because
an
we're advancing.
interesting subject.
Yeah. So, yeah.
You know, this is
Absolutely.
novel. I know it is because I'm getting progressing with the patent application.
Yeah.
Although people
I'm
have
going to
talked,
post. By the way, I'm going to post James Payer's keynote from last year. He
right?
shared a couple of companies. One a Swedish company. AMP. It was studying the AMPK.
AMPK, yes,
Yeah.
I don't think myself that you can move the needle by only working in one dimension. So by just having a single, you know, SOX2, if you stir up SOX2, that's going to do some good. But I think if you want to have some real effects, you need to attack in a number of directions at once, because you otherwise you have to skew things too much, and I don't think the metabolism will cope.
Yeah, I took that away a little bit from David Barzilai's keynote this year as well. Yeah, yesterday.
He went into a lot of the overall things. Yes. Now, okay.
Yep.
Literate, it's already in your serum.
Yeah.
A lot of these things, the AMPK activators and the polyphenols, obviously, those aren't endogenous substances; they're exogenous. But
yeah, Velacor, is one company, and Amplifier. Yeah, Amplifier Therapeutics was the one that I was looking that I couldn't remember.
You come back to the commercials of all of this. It's actually quite hard because for people to invest a load of stuff, they need some IP out of it. In many ways, I've perhaps been a bit lucky because I came up with a different answer, and I haven't invested millions in it. But you know, I might be wrong. I don't think I am. I'm betting my life on it.
Right. And the X Prize competition, when does it take?
Well, the X Prize at the moment, people are basically having to fill in their applications for the semi-finals, and the semi-finals will run from 2025, I think, to 2026, and then the finals from then on roughly to about 2030. But I think people do need to recognize that the target in the X Prize is a hard target to hit. It would take medical science a long way forward, because although we've identified, so you know, we know that exercise is a good thing to do. We know there are lots of there are lots of sort of anti-aging interventions you can use that are helpful, and they slow down aging, but they don't actually reverse it. Yeah. Notwithstanding my epigenetic age being 37. We can talk about the merits of methylation and how reliable methylation measurements are, but that's a separate issue. Yeah. I heard something there, but was that a question to me? No, it's all right. Are you questioned out?
We appear to be.
Well, that's all right. You know, if you think of some more questions, I've got another period scheduled for next week, haven't I? So, if you think, yeah, at the end of the day, it's an interesting subject. I learn things from questions. I learn things from people who I always learn more from people who disagree with me than people who agree with me. Right. So you know, so I'm very interested in that. Probably next time it might be more question orientated, but you know.
Okay.
Well, I'll say, well, I'll meet you in some other call. I like this sort of using.
Oh, I know that some of the competitors are here. So you just mentioned something there, and which I probably need to reiterate to everyone, that there's a bit of strategy throughout the 16-day competition that's involved, because at any point, all of you who are competing can edit your ideas, can change the presentation, can address some of the needs and the questions that you're being asked in private and public communications with our expert judges. So it'll be interesting how everyone responds to the voting, to the feedback next week, and you know. So yeah, that's you. I think you brought a great point there, John.
Right. Anyway, well, yeah. So, well, yeah. Why do I do this? Well, I'm getting on with things anyway, but I learn from this because I'm dealing with an expert audience, and that's a useful thing to do, because you get useful questions, interesting challenges, things to think about.
Mhm.
Shall I take it down then? And see, I'll see you on another call at some
Yes,
point.
looking forward to the next conversation.
All right, cheery bye.
Thanks so much.